Founding Father by Clifford D. Simak. Winston Kirby walked home across the moor just before the twilight hour, and it was then he felt that the land was at its best. The sun was sinking into a crimson froth of clouds, and the first gray-silver light began to run across the swales. There were moments when it seemed all eternity grew quiet and watched with held breath. It had been a good day, and it would be a good homecoming, for the others would be waiting for him with the dinner table set, and the fireplace blazing, and the drinks set close at hand. It was a pity, he thought, that they would not go walking with him, although in this particular instance he was rather glad they hadn't. Once in a while it was a good thing for a man to be alone. For almost 100 years aboard the ship, there had been no chance to be alone. But that was over now, and they could settle down, just the 6 of them, to lead the kind of life they'd planned. After only a few short weeks, the planet was beginning to seem like home. In the years to come, it would become, in truth, a home such as Earth had never been. Once again he felt the twinge of recurring wonder at how they'd ever got away with it. That Earth should allow 6 of its immortals to slip through its clutches seemed unbelievable. Earth had real and urgent need for all of its immortals, and that not 1 but 6 of them should be allowed to slip away. To live lives of their own was beyond all logic, and yet that was exactly what had happened. There was something queer about it, Winston Kirby told himself. On the century-long flight from Earth, they'd often talked about it and wondered how it had come about. Cranford Adams, he recalled, had been convinced that it was some subtle trap, but after 100 years there was no evidence of any trap, and it had begun to seem Cranford Adams must be wrong. Winston Kirby topped the gentle rise that he had been climbing, and in the gathering dusk he saw the manor house, exactly the kind of house he had dreamed about for years, precisely the kind of house to be built in such a setting, except that the robots had built it much too large. But that, he consoled himself, was what one had to expect of robots. Efficient, certainly, and very well-intentioned and obedient and nice to have around, but sometimes pretty stupid. He stood on the hilltop and gazed down upon the house. How many times had he and his companions at the dinner table planned the kind of house they would build? How often had they speculated upon the accuracy of the specifications given for this planet they had chosen from the exploratory files, fearful that it might not be in every actuality the way it was described. But here, finally, it was, something out of Hardy, something from the Baskervilles, the long imagining come to comfortable reality. There was the manor house, with the light shining from its windows, and the dark bulk of the outbuildings built to house the livestock, which had been brought in the ship as frozen embryos, and soon would be emerging from the incubators. And there the level land that in a few more months would be fields and gardens. And to the north, the spaceship stood after years of roving. He walked down the hill, with the first night wind blowing in his face, and the ancient smell of heather in the air, and was happy and exultant. It was sinful, he thought, to be so joyful, but there was reason for it. The voyage had been happy, and the planet strike successful, and here he was, the undisputed proprietor of an entire planet upon which, in the fullness of time, he would found a family and a dynasty, and he had all the time there was. There was no need to hurry. He had all of eternity if he needed it. And best of all, he had good companions. They would be waiting for him when he stepped through the door. There would be laughter and a quick drink, then a leisurely dinner, and later brandy before the blazing fire. And there'd be talk, good talk, sober and intimate and friendly. It had been the talk, he told himself, more than anything else, which had gotten them sanely through the century of spaceflight. That and their mutual love and appreciation of the finer points of the human culture, understanding of the arts, love of good literature, interest in philosophy. It was not often that 6 persons could live intimately for 100 years without a single spat, without a touch of cabin fever. Inside the manor house, they would be waiting for him in the fire and candlelight, with the drinks all mixed and the talk already started, and the room would be warm with good fellowship and perfect understanding. Cranford Adams would be sitting in the big chair before the fire, staring at the flames and thinking, for he was the thinker of the group. And Alan Burbage would be standing, with one elbow on the mantel, a glass clutched in his hand, and in his eyes the twinkle of good humor. Cosette Middleton would be talking with him and laughing, for she was the gay one, with her elfin spirit and her golden hair. Anna Quinns, more than likely, would be reading, curled up in a chair, and Mary Foyle would be simply waiting, glad to be alive, glad to be with friends. These, he thought, were the long companions of the trip, so full of understanding, so tolerant and gracious, that a century had not dulled the beauty of their friendship. Winston Kirby hurried, a thing he almost never did, at the thought of those 5 who were waiting for him, anxious to be with them, to tell them of his walk across the moor, to discuss with them still again some details of their plans. He turned into the walk. The wind was becoming cold, as it always did with the fall of darkness, and he raised the collar of his jacket for the poor protection it afforded. He reached the door and stood for an instant in the chill to savor the never-failing satisfaction of the massive timbering and the stout, strong squareness of the house. A place built to stand through the centuries, he thought. A place of dynasty with a sense of foreverness. He pressed the latch and thrust his weight against the door, and it came slowly open. A blast of warm air rushed out to greet him. He stepped into the entry hall and closed the door behind him. As he took off his cap and jacket and found a place to hang them, he stamped and scuffed his feet a little to let the others know that he had returned. But there were no greetings for him, no sound of happy laughter. There was only silence from the inner room. He turned about so swiftly that his hand trailed across his jacket and dislodged it from the hook. It fell to the floor with a smooth rustle of fabric and lay there, a little mound of cloth. His legs, suddenly, were cold and heavy, and when he tried to hurry, the best he could do was shuffle, and he felt the chill edge of fear. He reached the entrance to the room and stopped, shocked into immobility. His hands went out and grasped to the door jamb on either side of him. There was no one in the room. And not only that, the room itself was different. It was not simply the companions who were gone. Gone as well were the rich furnishings of the room, gone the comfort and the pride. There were no rugs upon the floor, no hangings at the windows, no paintings on the wall. The fireplace was a naked thing of rough and jagged stone. The furniture, the little there was primitive, barely knocked together. A small trestle table stood before the fireplace, with a 3-legged stool pulled up to a place that was set for one. Winston Kirby tried to call. The first time the words gurgled in his throat and he could not get them out. He tried again and made it. "Job! Job! Where are you?" Job came running from somewhere in the house. "What's the trouble, sir?" "Where are the others? Where have they gone? They should be waiting for me." Job shook his head just slightly. A quick move right and left. "Mr. Kirby, sir, they were never here." "Never here? But they were here when I left this morning. They knew I'd be coming back." "You fail to understand, sir. There were never any others. There was just you and I and the other robots and the embryos, of course." Winston Kirby let go of the door and walked a few feet forward. "Job," he said, "you're joking." But he knew something was wrong. Robots never joke.
"We let you keep them as long as we could," said Job. "We hated to have to take them from you, sir, but we needed the equipment for the incubators."
"But this room, the rugs, the furniture—"
"That was all part of it, sir. Part of the Dimensino."
Winston Kirby walked slowly across the room, used one foot to hook the three-legged stool out from the table. He sat down heavily. "The Dimensino?" he asked.
"Surely you remember."
He frowned to indicate he didn't, but it was coming back to him, some of it, slowly and reluctantly, emerging vaguely after all the years of forgetfulness. He fought against the remembering and the knowledge. He tried to push it back into that dark corner of his mind from which it came. It was sacrilege and treason. It was madness.
"The human embryos," Job told him, "came through very well. Of the 1,000 of them, all but 3 are viable."
Winston Kirby shook his head as if to clear away the mist that befogged his brain.
"We have the incubators all set up in the outbuilding, sir," said Job. "We waited as long as we could before we took the Dimensino equipment. We let you have it until the very last. It might have been easier, sir, if we could have done it gradually, but there is no provision for that. You either have Dimensino or you haven't got it."
"Of course," said Winston Kirby, mumbling just a little. "It was considerate of you. I thank you very much." He stood up unsteadily and rubbed his hand across his eyes. "It's not possible," he said. "It simply can't be possible. I lived for 100 years with them. They were as real as I am. They were flesh and blood. I tell you, they were—" The room still was bare and empty, a mocking emptiness, an alien mockery.
"It is possible," said Job gently. "It is just the way it should be. Everything has been according to the book. You are here, still sane, thanks to the Dimensino. The embryos came through better than expected. The equipment is intact. In 8 months or so, the children will be coming from the incubators. By that time, we will have gardens and a crop on the way. The livestock embryos will also have emerged, and the colony will be largely self-sustaining." Winston Kirby strode to the table, picked up the plate that was laid at the single place. It was lightweight plastic. "Tell me," he said, "have we any china? Have we any glassware or silver?" Job looked as near to startled as a robot ever could. "Of course not, sir. We had no room for more than just the bare essentials this trip. The china and the silver and all the rest of it will have to wait until much later." "And I have been eating ship rations?" "Naturally," said Job. "There was so little room and so much we had to take." Winston Kirby stood with the plate in his hand, tapping it gently on the table, remembering those other dinners aboard the ship and since the ship had landed. The steaming soup in its satiny tureen, the pink and juicy prime ribs, the huge potatoes baked to a mealy turn, the crisp green lettuce, the shine of polished silver, the soft sheen of good china, the— "Job," he said. "Sir."
"It was all delusion, then?"
"I'm afraid it was. I am sorry, sir."
"And the robots?"
"All of us are fine, sir. It was different with us. We can face reality."
"And humans can't?"
"Sometimes it is better if they can be protected from it."
"But not now?"
"Not any more," said Job. "It must be faced now, sir."
Winston Kirby laid the plate down on the table and turned back to the robot. "I think I'll go up to my room and change to other clothes. I presume dinner will be ready soon. Ship rations, doubtless?"
"A special treat tonight," Job told him.
"Hezekiah found some lichens, and I've made a pot of soup."
"Splendid," Winston Kirby said, trying not to gag.
He climbed the stairs to the door at the head of the stairs. As he was about to go into the room, another robot came tramping down the hall.
"Good evening, sir," it said.
"And who are you?"
"I'm Solomon," said the robot. "I'm fixing up the nurseries." "Soundproofing them, I hope." "Oh, nothing like that. We haven't the material nor time." "Well, carry on," said Winston Kirby, and went into the room. It was not his room at all. It was small and plain. There was a bunk instead of the great four-poster he had been sleeping in, and there were no rugs, no full-length mirror, no easy chairs. Delusion, he had said, not really believing it. But here there was no delusion. The room was cold with a dread reality, a reality he knew that had been long delayed. In the loneliness of this tiny room, he came face to face with it and felt the sick sense of loss. It was a reckoning that had been extended into the future as far as it might be, and extended not alone as a matter of mercy, of mere consideration, but because of a cold, hard necessity, a practical concession to human vulnerability. For no man, no matter how well adjusted, no matter if immortal, could survive intact, in mind and body, a trip such as he had made. To survive a century under space conditions, there must be delusion and companionship to provide security and purpose from day to day, and that companionship must be more than human. For mere human companionship, however ideal, would give rise to countless irritations, would breed deadly cabin fever. Dimensino companionship was the answer, then, providing an illusion of companionship flexible to every mood and need of the human subject, providing as well a background to that companionship, a wish-fulfillment way of life that nailed down security such as humans under normal circumstances never could have known. He sat down on the bunk and began to unlace his heavy walking shoes. The practical human race, he thought. Practical to the point of fooling itself to reach destination. Practical to the point of fabricating the Dimensino equipment to specifications which could be utilized upon arrival in the incubators. But willing to gamble when there was a need to gamble. Ready to bet that a man could survive a century in space if he were sufficiently insulated against reality. Insulated by seeming flesh and blood which, in sober fact, existed only by the courtesy of the human mind, assisted by intricate electronics. For no ship before had ever gone so far on a colonizing mission. No man had ever existed for even half as long under the influence of Dimensino. But there were few planets where man might plant a colony under natural conditions, without extensive and expensive installations and precautions. The nearer of these planets had been colonized, and the survey had shown that this one, which he finally had reached, was especially attractive. So Earth and man had bet. Especially one man, Winston Kirby told himself with pride. But the pride was bitter in his mouth. The odds, he recalled, had been 5-3 against him. And yet, even in his bitterness, he recognized the significance of what he had done. It was another breakthrough, another triumph for the busy little brain that was hammering at the door of all eternity. It meant that the galaxy was open, that Earth could remain the center of an expanding empire, that Dimensino and Immortal could travel to the very edge of space, that the seed of man would be scattered wide and far, traveling as frozen embryos through the cold black distance, which hurt the mind to think of. He went to the small chest of drawers and found a change of clothing, laid it on the bunk, and began to take off his hiking outfit. Everything was going according to the book, Job had said. The house was bigger than he had wanted it, but the robots had been right. A big building would be needed to house 1,000 babies. The incubators were set up, and the nurseries were being readied, and another far Earth colony was getting underway. And colonies were important, he remembered, reaching back into that day 100 years before, when he and many others had laid their plans, including the plan whereby he could delude himself and thus preserve his sanity. For with more and more of the immortal mutations occurring, the day was not too distant when the human race would require all the room that it could grab. And it was the mutant immortals who were the key persons in the colonizing programs. going out as founding fathers to supervise the beginning of each colony, staying on as long as needed to act as a sort of elder statesman until that day when the colony could stand on its own feet. There would be busy years ahead, he knew, serving as father, proctor, judge, sage, and administrator, a sort of glorified old man of a brand-new tribe. He pulled on his trousers, scuffed his feet into his shoes, rose to tuck in his shirt-tail, and he turned by force of habit to the full-length mirror. And the glass was there. He stood astounded, gaping foolishly at the image of himself, and behind him in the glass he saw the great four-poster and the easy chairs. He swung around, and the bed and chairs were gone. There were just the bunk and the chest of drawers in the small, mean room. Slowly he sat down on the edge of the bunk, clasping his hands so they wouldn't shake. It wasn't true. It couldn't be. The Dimensino was gone. And yet it was with him, still lurking in his brain, just around the corner if he would only try. He tried, and it was easy. The room changed as he remembered it, with the full-length mirror and the massive bed upon which he sat, the thick rugs, the gleaming liquor cabinet, and the tasteful drapes. He tried to make it go away, barely remembering back in some deep black closet of his mind that he must make it go. But it wouldn't go away. He tried and tried again, and it still was there, and he felt the will to make it go slipping from his consciousness. "No!" He cried in terror, and the terror did it. He sat in the small, bare room. He found that he was breathing hard, as if he'd climbed a high, steep hill. His hands were fists, and his teeth were clenched, and he felt the sweat trickling down his ribs. It would be easy, he thought, so easy and so pleasant to slip back to the old security, to the warm, deep friendship, to the lack of pressing purpose. But he must not do it, for here was a job to do. Distasteful as it seemed now, as cold, as barren, it still was something he must do. For it was more than just one more colony. It was the breakthrough, the sure and certain knowledge, the proved knowledge that man no longer was chained by time or distance. And yet there was this danger to be recognized. It was not something on which one might shut one's mind. It must be reported in every clinical detail so that, back on Earth, it might be studied and the inherent menace somehow remedied or removed. Side effect, he wondered, or simply a matter of learning. For the Dimensino was no more than an aid to the human mind, an aid to a very curious end, the production of controlled hallucinations operating on the wish-fulfillment level. After 100 years, perhaps, the human mind had learned the technique well, so well that there was no longer need of the Dimensino. It was something he should have realized, he insisted to himself. He had gone on long walks, and during all those hours alone, the delusion had not faded. It had taken the sudden shock of silence and emptiness, where he had expected laughter and warm greeting, to penetrate the haze of delusion in which he'd walked for years. And even now it lurked, a conditioned state of mind, to ambush him at every hidden thicket. How long would it be before the ability would start to wear away? What might be done to wipe it out entirely? How does one unlearn a thing he spent a century in learning? Exactly how dangerous was it? Was there necessity of a conscious thought, an absolute command, or could a man slip into it simply as an involuntary retreat from dreary reality? He must warn the robots. He must talk it over with them. Some sort of emergency measure must be set up to protect him against the wish or urge. Some manner of drastic action be devised to rescue him, should he slip back into the old delusion. Although, he thought, it would be so fine to walk out of the room and down the stairs and find the others waiting for him with the drinks all ready and the talk well started. "Cut it out!" he screamed. Wipe it from his mind. That was what he must do. He must not even think of it.
He must work so hard that he would have no time to think, become so tired from work that he'd fall into bed and go to sleep at once and have no chance to dream. He ran through his mind all that must be done: the watching of the incubators, preparing the ground for gardens and for crops, servicing the atomic generators, getting in timbers against the need of building, exploring and mapping and surveying the adjacent territory, overhauling the ship for the one robot return flight to Earth. He filled his mind with it. He tagged items for further thought and action. He planned the days and months and years ahead, and at last he was satisfied. He had it under control. He tied his shoes and finished buttoning his shirt. Then, with a resolute tread, he opened the door and walked out on the landing. A hum of talk floating up the stairway stopped him in his tracks. Fear washed over him, then the fear evaporated. Gladness burst within him, and he took a quick step forward. At the top of the stairs, he halted and reached out a hand to grasp the banister. Alarm bells were ringing in his brain, and the gladness fell away. There was nothing left but sorrow, a terrible, awful grieving. He could see one corner of the room below, and he could see that it was carpeted. He could see the drapes and paintings and one ornate golden chair. With a moan, he turned and fled to his room. He slammed the door and stood with his back against it. The room was the way it should be, bare and plain and cold. Thank God, he thought. Thank God. A shout came up the stairway. "Winston? What's wrong with you? Winston, hurry up!" And another voice. "Winston, we're celebrating. We have a suckling pig." And still another voice. "With an apple in its mouth." He didn't answer. They'll go away, he thought. They have to go away. And even as he thought it, half of him, more than half, longed in sudden agony to open up the door and go down the stairs and know once again the old security and the ancient friendship. He found that he had both his hands behind his back, and that they were clutching the doorknob as if they were frozen there. He heard steps on the stairway, the sound of many happy, friendly voices coming up to get him.